creativity because I truly believe that it is such an important part of creating lasting change. We have to have compassion first. We have to care enough about the problems we're trying to solve. We have to have the courage then to actually show up and do something about it. You have courage just by choosing to show up here tonight when there's 1,000 other things you could be doing. But courage and creativity alone or courage and compassion alone would not be enough. When you mix in that creativity, that ability to solve old problems in new ways, when you begin thinking about things that you've always seen as normal and just the way that they are, when you begin thinking of those things in new and fresh ways, that's when you can begin to be creative. So Amos mentions 11 years ago, my wife and I started a nonprofit called Mercy Project. I read a book about child trafficking. I was pastoring a church in Dallas. I was doing a terrible job. I wasn't happy with them. They weren't happy with me. It was a bad mix. And we were both working really hard and honoring each other. But it was really clear that some of my personality and some of what was going to be best for that church were just, we were having a hard time. And I read this book about child trafficking. And at the time, I know you guys don't have the context of this because you're all very young. But at the time, no one was really talking about human trafficking. Now it's very much a buzzword. Thankfully, we're all aware that even in the United States, there's trafficking that goes on. But 11, 12 years ago, when I first read about child trafficking, I had no sense that there were slaves in the world. I didn't know certainly that there were children. I mean, it blew my mind. And so I Googled the author's name. I found her phone number. I called her. I showed up in Ghana with her about 3 months later. And I went out on the world's largest man-made lake, Lake Volta in Ghana, Africa. And I started meeting these little boys and girls who'd been trafficked into the fishing industry, working 12, 14 hours a day, sold for $20 from families who couldn't afford to feed them. And they thought the very best thing they could do for their children in that moment was at least make sure they got some food. And if they were catching fish all day, they would at least be able to eat every night. And so you have these moms that are in this impossible situation beyond what any of us can even comprehend because we have so much more than we need here in America. But truly a crushing situation. I came home from that trip and I was heartbroken. I mean, I was truly heartbroken to think my wife and I were about to have our first baby, this little girl named Micah. And we were already praying over my wife's belly that this little girl was going to be a woman of justice and mercy. And then I go and meet these children who've been trafficked into slavery. And I'm like, man, how can I ask my daughter to be a woman of justice and mercy if I'm not willing to model for her what justice and mercy looks like? I mean, what kind of dad would I be? And so I said, okay, I'm going to try to do something about this. And so we started trying to figure out what the heck was going on in Ghana. I didn't even understand the problem. I couldn't really find the root of the problem. Everyone was saying it's bad, which I agreed, but no one really seemed to be getting at the root causes of why are these children being trafficked in the first place. And in Ghana, I found out over a couple of years of going back and forth to Ghana, a bunch of every 6 weeks, I was getting on a plane and going back and forth to Ghana. And I realized, didn't take too long to realize was really an economic problem. And that point was driven home, by the way. I'll fast forward a little bit and then come back. The day we did our first rescue in Ghana, which is about 800 days after we started Mercy Project. So for 800 days, I wondered if this mission was a failure. For 800 days, I wondered if I had quit my job and put my family in a perilous financial position for no reason. For 800 days, I wondered if I was taking donor money and wasn't going to be able to show them any sort of results. I mean, I use that story a lot when I'm talking to groups about persistence. I mean, every day I had to wake up and remember that I still believed as much that this was the right thing as I had to do the first day for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of days. But I remember that very first rescues, the village of Adavupe. And we're sitting there and they've done this ceremony and they're kind of launching the children because we partnered with them, which I'll talk more about. But I asked this question that completely changed the future of Mercy Project. I said, how many of you were trafficked children yourselves? And about 3/4 of the community raised their hands. And that's when it dawned on me how vicious a cycle this was. That when you grew up as a child slave working on Lake Volta and you became old enough, you were just going to buy more children to work like you had worked because it's the only thing that you knew how to do. And that's when I realized the weight, frankly, of needing to really get at the root cause of this. Because when you have any sort of social problem that's multi-generational, the deeper those roots go, the harder it is to come out of it, which means the complexity is that much more difficult, which means the complexity of whatever solution you come up with is going to have to also match the complexity of the problem. So what we've done in Ghana that Amos was very gracious in describing, and I do think it's innovative, and we've won international awards because of the innovation. To be honest, there's an award called the Norman Borlaug Humanitarian Award that we won a few years ago because of the innovation that we've done in Ghana. And I'm proud of what we've done in Ghana, because there's a lot of ways to solve a problem, and they're not always the ways to solve a problem forever. And what we've done in Ghana is go into these fishing communities, and we've taught these fishermen and their families how to fish by using aquaculture or cage fishing. So one fisherman or two fishermen can now do the work of many, many, many children. We put 10,000 baby tilapia into these huge cages. The cages are huge, by the way. They're about as large as this middle section of the room, very large cages. And they call them tilapia. You're going to get a little fish lesson tonight, because I got a lot of fish lessons, because I didn't know a thing about fish. I didn't even like fishing like this, much less now. All of a sudden I got to be an aquaculture expert in a different country. So they call baby tilapia are called fingerlings, because they're about as long as your pinky finger. And we would buy these fingerlings. We would take them. We would show the community how to build their own cage, huge cage, put the fingerlings in. They'd feed them every single day for 6 months. At the end of, this is how it's supposed to work in theory. At the end of the 6 months, you pull out 10,000 hardy tilapia, you take them to the market, you sell them, right? Great idea. I was selling the heck out of that story to my donors. We were pumped up. Just one problem. The fish were all dying. The food wasn't the right food. The cages were breaking. The storms were messing up the cages. We finally got some fish. We took them to the market. The people totally got us. We were not ready at the market. They bought the fish for like 1/10 of market price. I mean, it was a disaster. It was everything that could have possibly gone wrong that first year or 2 years went wrong, but we knew this was the solution. And so we kept at it. We built stronger cages. We had better anchors. We moved them to different parts of the lake, depending on when the storms would come through. We taught the community how to build using local materials. So when things did break, they were able to repair them more quickly. We taught classes on how to repair. We found better food that was the right proportion of protein to carbohydrates. I mean, all of these things. And we also got wise about how to sell the fish at the market. So any business major could have told us that we were walking down the wrong road. That first harvest, we were so excited. We took thousands of fish to the market. They came back. We asked them how much money they sold the fish for, and it was like a fraction of what they should have gotten. And we were like, this doesn't make sense. Talk to us about what happened. They're like, well, we brought all the fish. Everyone just stood on the other side of the market. They just stared at us. And then right at the end of the day, when we knew we had to sell the fish because they were fresh and they would spoil if we took them home, they came and bought them for just pennies on the dollar. And we're like, okay, touche, people in the market, you got us. So the next time we took salted fish. The next time we took smoked fish. The next time we only took a few hundred fish at a time, and we didn't oversupply the market so that supply and demand didn't get thrown off. But we had to learn all those lessons. I love to tell you we learned that in 2 months or 4 months. It was years. It was years of learning those lessons. Years of wondering if we were doing the right thing. Years of having to look at a profit and loss sheet and seeing that we were spending more money than the cages were bringing in. It was complex and it was difficult. The other side of our process that took years to get right and is still much more expensive than doing it other ways is that we made a commitment very early on that we wanted to reunite the children back into their families, that we believed that God designed families that when they could be together, that they should be together. And what we realized really early on in Ghana was that these children were not orphans. So a lot of times we just assume any child who's poor in a developing country is an orphan, which is absurd. Tons of amazing moms and dads who just don't have the means to take care of their children. And so we made the decision very early on that if it was at all possible, we wanted to go for family reunification. We didn't want to build a big orphanage when we had kids that weren't even orphans. And if we could strengthen the family unit, keep them together, there's going to be better for the kids in the long run. It's going to be better for the parents in the long run. And just from a standpoint for us personally, from a standpoint of redemption, it just felt like that. If we could do that, that felt like the right thing to do. And that's what we've done. And it's been much more expensive, probably, than building an orphanage. And it's been much more complex. And we've had to navigate hard stuff with those families. It's not straightforward. There's a family, your family is complex too. My family's complex, your family's complex. Our families are a mix of beauty and messiness, all of us. And that's the same in a developing country, especially parents who in some cases are so poor that they actually sold one of their children because they couldn't afford to feed him and they were worried that they were going to starve to death. So that's a lot of complexity. But we've got these amazing Ghanaians, social workers all over the country. They do an absolutely fantastic job. And they really committed with us as we started hiring these social workers. They committed with us that they were willing to walk alongside these families and to do the hard work and to get in the trenches with them, to get in the ditches with them, and to help understand what they needed, how they could be empowered best, and then to walk alongside them as they did that. So that's looked like microloans for businesses. That's looked like parenting classes. That's looked like something as simple as a parent who didn't have access to national health care in Ghana simply because when they went to the national health care office to get their health care card, they couldn't sign their name. So my social workers had, because they had never been to school. So my social workers had to go and advocate for them and say, listen, you can't blame them. If you want to blame anybody, blame the country of Ghana that this mother didn't get to go to school when she was a little girl. And you need to accept her thumbprint as proof of who she is, because it's not her fault that she can't sign her name. So they would go and they would advocate for these families. And now a mother gets a national health care card. The next time her child gets sick, she's able to take them to the doctor instead of to a witch doctor where maybe they're going to get some sort of medicine that makes them more sick. So, but you take this and scale it times hundreds of families. This is messy. This is hard. It's challenging. You're rescuing 11, 12-year-old kids who've never been to a day of school in their lives. And you're trying to drop them into school for the first time. They're literally sitting in class with what they call KG, kindergarten. They're learning how to read with 5 and 6-year-olds. They're discovering the alphabet for the first time at 11 and 12 years old. Now they move through faster, the grades, but the schools are telling us you can't bring these children here. They're too old. We're saying, listen, it's not this child's fault that they were trafficked. We're not going to fault them. Now you're going to punish their children because we know children follow in their parents' footsteps. And so we're having to persuade these schoolmasters like, hey, man, like this is a chance for you to be a part of the future of Ghana. You can imagine the villages aren't always happy to see us. Now they're okay. But I stood under a lot of mango trees those first couple of years, telling a lot of stories. Africans love stories. So Chris Field always has a story. So God gave me that gift of being perfectly matched with those villages. So we were walking into these villages. Some of them have never seen a white person before, sitting under the mango tree, which is the customary meeting place. And I'm sitting there telling them these fables and parables, trying to get them to understand why it's important for them to give the children a chance to go home. And so that's really the story of Mercy Project. 11 years of that, 201 children rescued, reunited back into their families, about 20 villages that are now using aquaculture. They're making about 15% more per family than they were when they were using the labor of the children. And they're using those collective funds to make their community better. One community recently built a school in their own little village so that their own biological children who were just sitting around all day would actually be able to go to school. So it's been this vicious cycle, but also in a beautiful way, where truly you have win-win-wins, which are pretty rare in our culture. But you can imagine that all the things I just described to you sound very simple the way I'm saying them to you now, but you can imagine some of what went into them. And so a lot of my passion around creativity comes from the fact that the same process we used to help rescue more than 200 children out of trafficking in Ghana is the same exact process available to each and every person who chooses to engage it. There's nothing unique or special about me. I am pretty stubborn, so maybe that's what's unique about me, is that I was willing to stay after it and persist when maybe other people would have given up. But as far as creative, no one was using the word creative when it came to me in high school. The word that was used a lot with me was potential. And what is your parents' phone number? Those were kind of the things I heard a lot when I was a kid. I never heard anybody saying, Chris Field, you're really creative. That's not. I was creative, but it was in like doing stuff the teachers couldn't figure out who it was, sort of creative. It wasn't the sort of creativity that would be what I would hope you all, by proxy of you being here, I can assure you that you already are on a better path than I was when I was your age. So kudos to you already. But I feel passionate that creativity is truly for everyone. Amos mentioned this. I believe this wholeheartedly. We've gotten this sense that creativity is art. Creativity is painting. Creativity is making something out of a sculpture. Creativity is being a graphic designer. But the truth is, creativity is all around us and not just in art. I mean, think about the people who design buildings like this library. Think about the people who put together traffic flow patterns in cities so that we sit at lights for the least amount of time. People that build buildings. People that have to figure out how to have, doctors and nurses who are having to try to keep people alive right now because of COVID. I mean, the amount of creativity that flows just through culture and society that really goes unnamed and unappreciated, which means it's unlearned from, is unfortunate because creativity is everywhere. It's all around us. We just have to choose to actually see it and to engage it. One of the things I love about creativity for me is that I believe it is by far the most valuable currency. If you have a bunch of money in the bank right now, that's great. And congrats to you and keep saving up. That's awesome. But at any time, the US dollar could become devalued. And you might say, well, I've got a bunch of gold bars in my house. And I'd say, well, that's kind of weird, first of all. But that aside, that also could go very, very much devalued. We don't know because we've had a lot of years of prosperity in America, but dollars and even gold and the stock market, they're not always going to go up like they're going up right now and like they've gone up most of your lives. That's a funny thing in the life of the economics of the world. It's not going to happen forever. But creativity as a currency is a currency that never goes away. It's a currency that doesn't disappear. It's a currency that you can lose your job, but they can take your job away from you if you have bosses, but no one can take away your creative ability to solve problems. They simply can't. If you learn how to solve problems in fresh, innovative, creative ways, I am insistent that you will always have a place to work. There's always going to be places who need people to solve problems in creative ways. Now, if what you learn how to do is push a button and pull a lever, someday you may be replaced by a machine. Someday you may be replaced by a robot. Someday you may be replaced by a worker that's younger than you that they think they can pay less than you. But when you know how to use creativity and you really believe in creativity as currency, which I absolutely do, then you're never going to run out of the opportunity to work because there's always going to be problems that need somebody to solve them. I was giving a speech not long ago with the team at Ashley Furniture up in Arcadia, Wisconsin. I'm sitting in a little session with their CEO and some of their employees, and they're talking about these robots that they've built to help with manufacturing. And what's crazy is they're talking to the one guy who built the first robot, and Ashley Furniture, they didn't want to have to go buy these robots. They just got one of their guys to start building them. And he's building these robots for like $7,000, $8,000, $10,000 worth of materials. And then once he's tightened in what that robot needs to do, that robot is now producing hundreds of thousands of dollars of furniture every single week, every single month. But that robot didn't build itself. They went to a guy who they knew understood how to do complex things. And they said, build this robot. He's also the only one who knows how to repair the robots, right? And so for him, that makes sense. Somebody is always going to have to build automation, and somebody's always going to have to fine tune automation, and somebody's always going to have to apply automation. And so when we can use automation and creativity to enhance what we already do well, when we can use it to leverage time, that's where it's powerful. But there's not going to be replacement. Robots aren't going to build themselves necessarily. And even if they could, they're not going to be able to find efficiencies in so many of the ways, not for a very, very, very long time. So the definition for creativity that I like to use is very simple. Creativity, and it's not even mine. I just pulled it from one of the many dictionary definitions. That's my favorite one. It's just to produce original ideas. To be creative is to produce original ideas. It's not to necessarily, maybe your creative idea is painting. Maybe it is making sculptures. Maybe that's your jam and that's your gift. I say that's awesome. Make it, do that stuff. We have beautiful sculptures on campus because of people like Mr. Maxwell that's great at making art, and those places are holy and they're sacred and they're beautiful. That's never going to be my creativity. I'm not great at Pictionary. I'm pretty solid at charades, but not great at Pictionary, not great at making stuff out of clay. My kids aren't asking me for help on any art project or any project that requires cutting and pasting. That's just not my gift. But I can sit in a room with business leaders and they can tell me a problem they're having in that business. And God made me to come up with a list of 5, 10, 15, 20 ideas of things I might try to push through that. And for those business owners, that's a very valuable skill that they're willing to pay for. And they're willing to pay someone to do that. And then they're willing, on the other side, to pay somebody to execute those ideas. Now, I don't enjoy the execution as much as I enjoy the ideation, but I'll also do that sometimes. But the point is, every day you're encountering 1,000 opportunities to leverage your creativity, to think about old things and new ways, to think about how to produce original ideas. And when you begin to think about creativity as currency, and if you would invest as much in the ability to be creative as you do in other skills, which is the whole point of Adobe, so much of their passion is around giving you the tools you need to empower you to be creative, to find that inner creative inside of you. If you would invest as much in learning to be creative, I would tell you it's one of the most valuable investments you can make in college. Other skills are valuable as well, but that ability, you can ask anybody who hires people. The difference between somebody who can check boxes and somebody who can creatively solve problems is the difference between an entry-level worker and somebody who runs a company. That's the difference right there. When we started hiring in Ghana, you guys are like this. When we started hiring our social workers, we had 800 applicants for one job, by the way. Tough to get a job in Ghana, even tougher for women than men. I was very humbled the time I was sitting down early on in the life of the project, and a young woman came. I had to interview with her. She was great. I was ready. I was going to hire her. And I asked her at the end, I said, "Where are you headed?" "I'm getting a taxi. I can probably give you a ride." And she had taken a car 5 hours just to the interview. And she was going to take a car 5 hours home. But that's how difficult it is to find a job. She's willing to do a 10-hour round trip. So that's like you, by the way, applying for a minimum wage job in Dallas right now, just so you can find a job. I don't think any of you are doing that, or driving to Dallas every weekend to work. That's not even on our radar, right? We're choosing between A and B and C, especially right now. We can't find enough employees or at most jobs. But the thing that I really appreciate that we did, you guys will love this. What we realized is that in Ghana, especially, the school system is very, very, very rote. They are really reciting back facts, which is it's problematic. We have that a little bit in America, but nothing like in Ghana. Very frustrating, honestly. And what we realized was that our employees could have a great resume. They could answer all the right questions. But then when it came to really being able to do the job, sometimes it was a really big challenge. And what we realized was that what was going to differentiate somebody who was going to be great at the job versus somebody who struggled was going to be, could they creatively solve a problem? Had they learned how to think critically? And we needed a quick way to be able to understand this with everybody we hired. So we stopped asking all the generic questions. Tell us about your greatest strength. Tell us about a time in your life that was challenging. We stopped asking all those questions. We asked one question. If you couldn't have gotten to this interview today, however you got here, what would you have done? And most of the applicants didn't have a way to answer that question because they knew, if I do this, I can get there. But the ones who would say to us, even if they were bad ideas, and there were some bad ideas, even if they would say to us anything other than I'm not sure, or I would have come tomorrow at the same time. It's like, well, we wouldn't be here tomorrow. So even if their idea wasn't practical, just the fact that they were thinking about a different way to solve that problem told us when they get out in the field and they start working with these families and they start getting resistance, they're not going to immediately fold. They're not going to come back to us and say, hey, I asked the mom where the child was and she said she didn't know. What do you want me to do now? That they were going to be able to say, well, what do you mean you don't know? And we have an agreement, and this is supposed to be part of yada, 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 right? So that became what differentiated who was going to be able to work and who was not. And honestly, in many ways, I have a couple of other entities that I run as well now in the for-profit sector. And that question is just as valuable when I'm talking with young Americans that are maybe looking for a job as it is for those Canadians. I may not ask in the exact same way, but you can ask some of the adults in this room that hire. I promise you that they'll tell you a huge differentiator is, can someone pivot and critically think of a new way to solve the problem without having to come back to the manager and say, that way didn't work. Do you want me to try something else? And that's creativity, that ability to think critically and say, gosh, this didn't work. This is what I tell my staff all the time. If something doesn't work, try at least 2 or 3 other things before you come back to me. And then come back to me and say, this didn't work. I tried these 3 things. It's still not working. Do you have any ideas? I can handle that. But when you just come back and say, this didn't work, the back and forth on that is going to be crushing for us. So I want to tell you about 2 projects that are very recent, just to give you an idea of the way creativity works in my life. I could give you a dozen examples beyond Mercy Project, but I think these 2, they're very different, but I think you'll see some relevance in both of them. So both of these happened during COVID. So COVID happened to my family just like it happened to yours. And all of a sudden our kids are sent home from school. We have 4 kids. 2 of them were in school. All of a sudden my wife is homeschooling the 2 kids. And now she's got 2 other kids that are not being homeschooled. So she's trying to do the mom stuff with them. And she's trying to teach the other kids, and it's virtual and it's not the same. And it's just a mess. Nobody knew what they were doing. It was just, you guys know that if you were, especially if you weren't in college. If you were in college, it was just a mess. The whole thing was a mess. And I'm sitting there at home as a dad, and all of a sudden, like I had been speaking around the country. Boom, no more speaking. Okay. A lot of my job with Mercy Project is fundraising now. I'm not going to go around and ask people for money in the middle of a global pandemic when nobody knows what's happening to the economy. And I was going to Ghana, and Ghana wasn't letting anybody in, and airplanes weren't even flying. So I'm like, well, shoot. I mean, I just ran out of stuff on my list to do. So I'm like, all right, I got a couple options. So one of the things I did during the pandemic was I wrote the 80% of this new book. That I had a book brewing in me. I had written a first book with Leafwood already, Disrupting for Good. I was ready to write a second book. Just blocking out that time is the hardest thing to do as an author, especially when it's not your vocation, when it's not your full-time job is writing. And all of a sudden, my entire calendar just got cleared. And I'm like, hey, no better time than now to start writing. So I've knocked out probably 80% of that rough draft in that first month of COVID. But there was 2 other things that I did too. I saw my kids, and my wife was trying to keep my kids busy, because even when they were doing virtual learning, it wasn't taking 8 hours a day, and we couldn't go anywhere. So it's like my wife is just like running circles trying to keep everybody happy. And I'm like, you know what? If we're feeling this, I bet there's a lot of other people feeling this, a lot of other parents. So I had this idea of something called afternoon adventures. So I was like, what if I found people with cool jobs and I got them to basically take kids on a virtual field trip that I would live stream, and parents could tune their kids in. It would give them a little bit of break every day, be the same time every single day, and they could just tune in. So I was like, all right, I'm going to see if there's any interest in this. So I posted on my Facebook page, hey, I'm going to do these afternoon adventures. I'm thinking about starting it on Monday. If any of you would be interested, just let me know and I'll send you a link. Well, that was on Saturday. By Monday morning, 25,000 families had said, yeah, we would be interested in that. So I'm like, okay, did not expect that to happen. So luckily I had teed up the coolest of all my friends. Her name's Brittany, and she's an exotic animal veterinarian. And she does really cool work with exotic animals all over the state of Texas. And she was going to be hanging out with giraffes. So that was going to be the first. So of course, the kids were stoked about that. Bubbles the giraffe. I mean, who can be upset about that, right? So we send out this link literally to 25,000 people, which was crazy by itself. 12,000 people tune in that first Facebook Live. 12,000. We broke Facebook. Facebook had to throttle back my public profile page because we were using too much bandwidth on my page. Luckily, I knew a guy that's pretty high up at Facebook that are donors and supporters of our nonprofit. So I'm like emailing him like, dude, please get your people to chill out on my page right now. So we have all these families come on and we start doing these afternoon adventures. Every weekday for 6 weeks, we run those afternoon adventures. Hundreds of thousands of views, pizza parlor, pizza places, police stations, fire stations. We did sign language lessons. We went back to the veterinarian and did another one with wolves. I mean, it was the whole thing. It was just so fun. And every day for 6 weeks, parents would sit their kids down in front of the computer and the kids would ask when they woke up. The parents would tell us, hey, what's the adventure today? Now, listen, there's something really important, a clarification I want to make sure you don't miss here. I was the least qualified person to do that in the whole world. I didn't have the backing. I wasn't a school district that had an audiovisual team. I didn't have a group of students already in a database that I could reach out to. All I was the first one to market. I was the first one to drop out there and say, I have this cool idea. Would any of you be interested? Now, I say it in the book, there's every school district in America was better positioned to do that than me. Think about it. They have thousands of parent email addresses. The parents already trust them. And most school districts have entire audiovisual teams. They have cameras, they have streaming capabilities. I didn't have any of that stuff, but I was willing to say, I have this idea. Instead of just sitting on it, I'm going to take it to the market and I'm going to see how the market responds to the idea. And obviously the market responded favorably. And we did that thing and it was a blast. And we did it for 6 weeks until it just got to be, it had run its course at that point. I was frankly ready to stop thinking of stuff for kids to be doing in the afternoons after 30 episodes of the Afternoon Adventures. But it opened up all kinds of new things. I had a public profile and author speaker Facebook page. I had 15,000 people on it before Afternoon Adventures, which is fine. I had 50,000 at the end of Afternoon Adventures. So now those are people who bought copies of the book when it came out. Those are people who are interested and engaged in what I have to say or do now because they met through Afternoon Adventures. A bunch of those people ended up being on the book launch team. And when we asked them, how did you hear about us? They said, we met Chris through Afternoon Adventures. And so that one little thing ended up being a huge opportunity. Again, I want to be clear. There was nothing that made me best positioned to pull that off. Actually, the opposite. It was many people better positioned to pull that off than me, except that I was the first one to show up. The other one that I did, I had a buddy call me right when COVID happened. He goes, man, I love fundraising. I love doing creative fundraisers. Like we've set 4 Guinness World Records at our nonprofit, played kickball 50 hours, played baseball 49 hours, played flag football 24 hours, and ran most people to run 1 mile relay in 24 hours. So we did these things as a cool way to get people's attention and raise money for the nonprofit. So I love doing stuff like that. But this guy called me, goes, man, we got to help these businesses that are shut down during COVID. A bunch of people are going to lose their jobs. It's going to be a big problem. He's like, I was thinking about what if we made a t-shirt and sold a bunch of t-shirts? And I was like, man, I love that we're going to do something because I do think we need to do something. I'm not sure it's a t-shirt. Like I feel like it's a bit overdone. Most people have t-shirts. Like I'm just not feeling that, I'm just like something about that. But I was like, but let me think. I was like, I really love that you brought this idea though. I've been thinking the same thing. I really appreciate you kind of bringing it to the top of my list. Let me marinate on this a little bit. So I'm like, listen, I love fundraising. I've learned how to use social media pretty well for getting people excited, but that's a limited scale. I mean, you can't help a bunch of businesses with a couple posts on Facebook and people throw in a few $100s. Like I knew the scale of this, it had outgrown my local reach. So I reached out to 2 people in my city. Bryan College Station is where I live. I reached out to the lady who ran United Way, whom I had never met. And I reached out to the lady who ran our community foundation, or the community foundation of Bryan College Station, who I'd met, I think, once or twice. I didn't really know either of them. And the 2 had never really worked. They never really worked together. The 2 biggest groups in town, they never really did work together. So I got them both on the phone at the same time. I said, listen, we got to do something. Businesses are going to start closing down. People are going to start losing their jobs, and the downstream cost from charities having to help people with rent and food and bills is going to be way more than any upfront costs. So let's try to get out ahead of this thing and see what we can do. You guys think, will you put your weight behind it? So like, we're in. So within about 7 days, we had both city mayors, the Chamber of Commerce, every media outlet, and these two big nonprofits, and we were rolling. So in 8 weeks, we raised and distributed $1.2 million to local nonprofits who are being inundated with new requests, and to businesses. I think the last count was it saved something like 600 jobs in our community by getting these businesses that there was a gap. We distributed, for those of you in the business world, the PPP loans were a big deal that the government did. We had all our 1.2 million handed out before the PPP loans were even opened up. And it's because we knew the time is of essence here. By the time those people have lost their jobs, they're already going to be so far behind. Even if they get hired back, they're never going to catch back up, especially marginalized people who are living paycheck to paycheck already. So I'm telling you that again to say, I didn't raise $1.2 million. I could not have raised $1.2 million. That job was above my pay grade. But I knew two people that if I got them both excited, they had all the right connections in town. And I knew that my specialty was going to be helping with messaging, communication, and getting people excited. And if you got the right players on board and you gave them that messaging and communication, the rest, I thought, was going to have a chance to really take off. And it took off, and it was great. It was a huge resource to our community, and I'm really proud of the work that was done. The reason I'm telling you those two stories is because those are the most current, up-to-date stories I can tell you to show you that this is still the way I look at the world. This isn't something I did one time 12 years ago with Ghana. This is the way I wake up every single day. And when somebody says someone should do something about that, I always want to be the kind of person that responds and says, well, why not me? Why not us? Why don't we do something about that? And they would say, well, we don't have the resources. Okay, well, probably we have more resources than we think. And who does have the resources? Let's get them excited about this idea. And so how are we doing on time, Amos? Great. Will you tell me? Great. Let me pull out my phone. I'm sorry. Very unprofessional. I got 10 minutes. All right. I want to tighten this up. So there's a couple of stories I want to tell you here that I think are going to drive home the point for you of what I think is so valuable when it comes to this idea of waking up and thinking creatively and you believing that you actually are creative. I told a story at the lunch session I did with faculty. It was the late 1960s, and NASA had a bunch of engineers that were trying to get spaceships to space, and they realized the engineers they had were really great at doing engineering, but they weren't great at creative problem solving. Engineers, if you don't know, are a bit like accountants, and they really like everything to be in the box. So NASA had great engineers, but not creative engineers. And they realized they really needed creative engineers because, putting people on the moon was going to require some problems that had never been solved before. They couldn't say, these are the 5 problems you're going to solve. Please solve them. They say, we don't know what problem you're going to solve. Please solve them. So they hired these 2 people to come in and create an assessment that would allow them during the interview process to do a better job of identifying creativity among their applicants. And the people knocked it out of the park. They nailed it. They did a great job. NASA started getting more creative engineers, and that went well. Obviously, we got some, and that worked out. Okay. But then they took that, they were so fascinated by the success of what happened at NASA that those 2 people who created that assessment, they took it out into the real world. And they began testing different people. So the first thing they did, they went to 400 to 500 5-year-olds, and they gave them this creativity assessment. And of course, they made it relevant for their age, but it was the same assessment, just broken down in age. 98% of those 5-year-olds tested as creative geniuses. 98%. They took that same group of kids when they were 10, and they tested them again, age appropriate. Now only 80% tested as creative geniuses. They did the same thing when they were 15 years old, and now just 12% tested as creative geniuses. They went from 98 to 12% from the age of 5 to 15. And then when they took that same study just out into the general public population of adults, they found that just 2% of adults tested as creative geniuses. It was literally the inverse of the 5-year-olds. 98% of 5-year-olds tested as creative geniuses, 2% of adults. Now, there's a lot of things we can take away from that. I'm not going to be able to go through them all here today. One of them that we can't touch on is that brings up a lot of questions to me about the way we're teaching in schools and how we're teaching how to solve problems. That's a whole nother topic for another day. But what I love about that story is it is such a clear, indisputable, evidence-based study that says you are more creative than you believe. Now, you may say, but I have a hard time being creative. That's a different problem. But to say I'm not creative is patently false, at least for 98% of us. You have been creative. You've just lost, I've lost that sense of creativity. It's a muscle that has to be exercised. When we exercise our creativity muscle, it gets bigger. We get better at being creative. We do it more. Think about a child playing with a cardboard box. If you've ever given a child a gift that you spent a bunch of money on, more than you should have, they've ripped it open, they play with it for 5 minutes, and all of a sudden they spend the rest of the day playing with the stupid box, right? You've seen that happen before, but here's why that happens. A toy is one thing. A cardboard box is anything. And children are drawn to that idea that this box can literally be, it can be a rocket ship. It can be a slide. It can be a park. It can be a baseball stadium. It could be anything that they want it to be. It's so much more fun than a toy in that way because it doesn't limit them, because children are naturally so much more creative. And that doesn't happen by accident. Your brain has two ways of thinking: convergent thinking and divergent thinking. Convergent thinking is linear, helps you a lot on scantrons, helps you a lot on multiple choice tests. Divergent thinking helps you be creative. If you've been in school, which all of you have been, or you wouldn't be in college, you know that most of the work we do ends up being convergent. We're all often asked, is the answer 1 or 2? Is the answer black or white? Is the answer A, B, C, or D? Very little space in most school programs for you to give an answer other than the one that is the right answer. Let's be honest, scroll through social media even today. As a culture, we struggle with complexity. Nuance it's unheard of. I mean, look, I'm not going to get crazy political with you, but I will say this. There's a reason we only have 2 parties in this country. We struggle with nuance. And so when you remove nuance, people say it's either yes or it's no. And any third party that's tried to come up with nuance, it hasn't worked. Because people want yes or they want no. Anything else, it blows their minds. It's too much. They can't handle it. We have a huge problem in our culture with nuance and complexity. Big problem. We want clear, direct, simple answers. We do not want nuance. And the truth is, life is nuanced. Life is messy. Life is nuanced. And anybody who tries to tell you otherwise, run far, 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 far away. You give me any hot button topic, any reasonable person can talk you through the nuance of that topic. Anyone who's thought about it for more than 5 minutes and isn't just parroting what they heard on their favorite news channel. But that's not what you hear. There's no space for nuance. Nuance doesn't make for clicks. Nuance doesn't get headlines. It doesn't get advertising dollars. And so you look around and you only hear this or you only hear that. You don't hear nuance in the middle. So the first thing I'll encourage you, just as an aside, when you find those people on social media that do have nuance, please elevate those voices, because we are in desperate need of, even if you don't agree with them, but they were actually thoughtful and considerate in the way they talked about something, elevate that voice and say, I don't necessarily agree with this conclusion, but I'm grateful for the nuance here, because we need so much more nuance than we have. The yelling at each other is clearly just not working. Okay. But I'm telling you that I got a little off track. I apologize. Got kind of excited there. So for me, when we think about convergent thinking, it's this very linear, A, B, C, D, black or white. It's right or it's wrong. No partial credit here. Divergent thinking is what happens on the fringe of our thinking. So divergent thinking is what happens when you're in the shower and you're not thinking about a bunch of other stuff. It's what happens when you're driving your car and you know exactly the routes you're going. It's what happens when you're on runs. It's what happens when you're doing yard work. It's what happens when you wake up in the middle of the night with an idea. That's divergent thinking. And it can only happen when you give it space to happen. It hangs out on the fringes. And most of our thinking stays convergent. I've got to be somewhere. I've got to get there a certain way. I've got to be there by this time, which means I've got to leave at that time. And I've got to stop to get gas on the way. We're always thinking this really linear check, 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 check. And divergent thinking has no space when we do that. So one of the biggest ways we can create more divergent thinking in our lives is to play more. Find more ways to play. And I don't necessarily mean intramurals or something like that, although that's fine. I mean, just find times to do things you don't usually do. Find time when you're doing new things and you're letting your brain relax from the details on your to-do list. Then you're going to find that divergent sort of thinking. It's going to come out from the fringes, and you're going to find that you got to give it space, though. You got to give that room to. I talk to people who are really good at this kind of divergent thinking, and I got these consistent themes like it came out most, and then when they were being silly, it came out most, and then when they started with the most ridiculous way to solve a problem, just for fun. Like, okay, if we had to get, if the elevator was broken and we had to get 100 people into this room, what would we do? Is, of course, you could say the stairs, but like, what if we built a huge slingshot and we shot people through and it's when they became playful and silly without regard of how that idea was going to be received that actually ended up launching new ideas that they had that they maybe would have never gotten to otherwise. The other thing I want to end with here, because I think it's really important, because I get asked a lot. People say, "Hey, how do I take an idea from ideation to execution?" And then the other question, I actually polled a big group of my friends, said, "What are the two things that are the most difficult for you in creativity?" I said, "I don't know how to take a big idea and break it down into smaller pieces. So I just have this huge idea. I don't know what to do with it." And the other thing they said was, "I don't know how to get other people to buy into my ideas." So they said, "I watched you, Chris, do that for a lot of years. How do you do that?" So I'm like, "Well, shoot, I don't know how I do that. It feels like it comes pretty naturally." So I reverse engineered, like, what is the process? And you're going to have to read the book, because I won't be able to go in total detail, but if the only two chapters you read, I've got one called Ideation to Execution, and the other one is around IWOO. And I want to end with this idea of IWOO. Ideation to execution, by the way, in a sentence or two, is really just about not getting overwhelmed by the size of your idea and just breaking it down into the next right thing. What's the next right thing? I have this big idea. I want to do something about it. People come to me a lot. "Chris, I have this big idea. Where should I start?" First of all, make sure nobody's already doing that thing. It's a bunch of people doing cool stuff all over the world. Make sure you're not going to try to start something somebody else is already doing, first of all, because they'd love to have you collaborate with your energy if they're already doing it, or start a version of that in your own town. But learn from somebody else's mistakes. Don't make all the mistakes yourself, first of all. But then on the IWOO, IWOO, how do I get people to buy into my idea? Which is something, by the way, we all want people. We have an idea. It's very beneficial to you for other people to believe in it. So here's what I say. First of all, pick your time of talking to people. You see, when we've been thinking about something for 2 or 3 months, somebody else has never heard the idea. It's very overwhelming. When we rush up to them in the parking lot, when they got a bunch of papers in their hand, and we're like, "Hey, real fast, I had this real quick idea. I was just going to if you just add 2 minutes," and it's like, no, they don't want to hear that from you. They want to go home. They want to put those papers down. It's not the time. First of all, pick your time and place. "Hey, I had an idea I wanted to run by you. Will you let me know if you have a good time the next few weeks for just a quick 15-minute overview?" So first of all, now it's blocked in. Now they're going to give us 15 minutes. Second thing, so we go in IWOO. Here's what it stands for, IWOO. The first thing is, I have an idea. Pretty simple. The second thing is the W. It's a win for both of us. So why do they care about your idea? Well, it's a win for both of us. Okay, now I'm listening. Third, before they start getting worried, I'm going to own the idea. I'm not asking you to do more. I'm going to own it. And fourth, you're going to have the option of how involved you want to be. I have an idea. It's going to be a big win for both of us. I'm going to own the execution of it. Don't worry. And after I give you the idea, I'd love for you to decide have the option. How involved would you like to be? When you present an idea like that to somebody, they don't say, "Oh, there's no time right now." There's no time for what? There's no time for you to listen to the idea that's going to be a win for both of us, that I'm going to execute, that you have the option to say you don't want to have anything to do with. There's no way. That's not how they're going to respond. To say, "Fine, if you have an idea and we're going to both win and you're really going to execute it and I have the option of not being involved, sure, I'll listen to your idea." And so now you have a chance to tell them your idea. You got to be able to break it down as simple as possible. reiterating that it's going to be a win for both of you, reiterating that you're going to own it, and reiterating that they're going to have the option to be involved. And my experience has been they're going to want to be involved when you explain it that way because they're not going to have to own it. What people don't want is to own a project. So when you say, here's why I'm coming to you, I need your permission. I need your money. I need your expertise. I need your design skills. I need your publishing team. Whatever that thing is that you need from them, just be clear. I have an idea. It's going to be a win for both of us. I'm going to own it. You get the option of being involved. There is a reason I'm talking to you. And there's just the last thing I'll say, and then I'll be done so we don't go over time. There's this all of you are familiar with Kickstarter, of course. And there's this fascinating statistic that most people have no idea about Kickstarter. Kickstarter publishes this data. You got to dig deep. They don't put it very obvious. Kickstarter publishes this data on campaigns and what makes campaigns successful. Listen to this. 8 out of 10, 80% of campaigns that reach just 20% funded become 100% funded. If you had to guess the tipping point for 80% success, no one in this room would guess 20%, right? We would guess 50%, maybe even 65%. That tiny bit of momentum, just people not being the first 20%, was enough to get 8 out of 10 projects funded. And I think that shows you the power of momentum. And that's why it's so important when you go to those first couple of stakeholders and you use that I have an idea. When they get on board, you get those first 2, 3, 4 people on board. Those people who already know you, they already like you, they already trust you. You get them on board, you're going to be surprised by the number of people that come behind you. But it's getting those first few stakeholders on board by not scaring them away, by not overwhelming them, by not making them feel like you want them to own the project. And once you get those first couple people say, this is pretty cool. And then you get to say, I've already got Jason Pikes on board. I've already got Dwayne on board. I've already got Larry Henderson on board. I've got a pretty good team already. We'd love to talk to you, see if you're interested. Like, geez, all those people already said yes. And of course I'll listen. And now all of a sudden you have some credibility. That's your first 20%. And now getting to the rest becomes so much more simple because now each new person is more credibility. Being able to say, I had this idea, I brought it to a few people. Everyone seems really excited about it. Let me tell you how you could be a part of it. So that is 50 furious minutes on creativity, a topic I could talk about for a lot longer than we had tonight. But I hope you heard something in here tonight that might inspire you. I hope, if nothing else, that you at least ponder that you are much more creative than you believe, and that you should invest in your own creativity as much as you invest in any other skill set you have, because it will truly create opportunities for you, both in the workplace and just in world transformation in ways that right now you can't even possibly measure. Because when I walked this campus 15 years ago, I had absolutely no clue whatsoever what I might be doing and whether it might work or not. But because, in large part because of creativity and a willingness to show up and do hard things, I get opportunities like this to be able to speak to students and people like you across the country, and to write cool books and to just have fun times like this. So I appreciate you guys so much. Amos, I don't know if you're going to close it out, but all right, Amos is going to come back up here, but thank you guys so much.